The wind on planet Keth 4 did not howl. It screamed. It came down from the Black Mountains in the north and swept across the flat frozen land like something alive and angry. There were no trees to slow it. No rocks big enough to hide behind. There was only the snow, and the cold, and the dark sky above that had not shown a star in 3 days. Vorith lay on his side in the snow. His massive body stretched nearly 40 feet from the tip of his snout to the end of his tail. His scales, which had once been the deep red-brown color of dried blood, were now pale and dull. Frost had built up in the folds of his neck, along his wings, and in the corners of his eyes. He had not moved in many hours. Moving took energy, and he had very little of that left. Beside him, chained to the same thick iron ring that was bolted to the wreckage of the prison ship, lay Selther. She was older than Vorith by nearly 1,000 years. Her scales were the color of black stone, and her horns had grown so long they curved back over her head like a crown. Right now those horns were half buried in the snow. Her breath came out in slow, shallow clouds that the wind tore away the moment they appeared. The prison ship was called the Drevketh Iron Hand. It had been a fine vessel once. Now it was a broken and twisted pile of metal that lay scattered across 200 feet of frozen ground. The crash had happened 3 days ago. Vorith did not remember much of it. He remembered the sound, a tearing, grinding shriek that lasted too long, and then the cold rushing in, and then nothing for a while. The Drevketh guards were all dead. Vorith had checked, in the first hours after the crash, dragging himself to the end of his chain and looking into the wreckage. He had counted 7 bodies. There may have been more inside the parts of the ship that were too crushed to enter. It did not matter. They were gone, and they were not coming back. What remained were the chains. Heavy, magnetic, built by Drevketh engineers who understood that a chain is only useful if it cannot be broken by the thing it is holding. The collars around Vorith and Selther's necks suppressed their fire, dampened their strength, and kept them fixed in place. Without power from the ship, the locks would not open. And the ship had no power left. Vorith turned his head slightly and looked at Selther. Her eyes were closed. For a terrible moment he thought she was already gone. Then he saw the faint movement of her ribs. Still breathing. Barely. He let out a long, slow sound from his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a word. Just something to fill the silence between them. Selther's eyes opened. They were pale gold, though the color had faded some in the cold. She looked at him without moving her head. "Do you remember the Battle of the Red Moon?" Vorith said to her. His voice was rough and low. Speaking cost him something. Selther blinked slowly. "Yes," she said. "We were outnumbered. 7 ships against us. We won," he said. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We won," she agreed. They were quiet again. The wind pushed the snow sideways across the ground. Somewhere in the wreckage a piece of metal groaned and then went still. Vorith had lived for 2,300 years. He had fought wars across 4 solar systems. He had burned whole fleets to ash and walked away from battles that should have killed him 10 times over. He had never once, in all those years, thought seriously about dying. Death was something that happened to smaller, weaker things. But here, now, in the snow of this unnamed frozen rock, he was beginning to understand it. It was not frightening. That surprised him. It was more like a heaviness, a slowing down. He closed his eyes. Then something made him open them again. It was not a sound, exactly. Or if it was too faint for him to identify. It was more like a change in the feeling of the air. Something moving out in the blizzard. Something that did not move the way wind moves, or the way snow moves when a piece of wreckage shifts. Vorith lifted his head. It took more effort than he expected. He stared out into the white and gray nothing in front of him. There was a shape. Small. Upright. 2 legs. Moving slowly but steadily through the snow, coming toward the wreck. He stared at it. His mind worked slowly in the cold, but it worked. "A death vision," Selther said without opening her eyes. She had somehow sensed his attention shifting. Vorith did not look away from the shape. "It is not," he said. Selther said nothing. The shape kept moving. It did not stop. It did not disappear the way dreams do when you look at them too long. It just kept coming, steady and small and impossible, walking through the killing cold as if it had every right to be there. Vorath watched it come. He did not know what it was. But it was real. Calvin Norris had been walking for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He knew the exact time because he had been counting. Not because he had nothing else to think about, but because counting helped him stay calm. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. The snow came up to his knees in some places. In others it was packed hard and he could walk on top of it. There was no way to know in advance which kind he was about to step into. That was the most tiring part. Not the cold, not the wind, but the constant surprise of the ground beneath his feet. He was a survey crew member aboard the long-range exploration vessel Dawnchaser, which was now sitting about 2 kilometers behind him with a buckled landing strut and a cracked fuel coupling. It would fly again. Pete said so, and Pete knew engines. But not today and probably not tomorrow. The distress beacon was running. Someone would come eventually. In the meantime, Cal had picked up a faint energy signature on his hand scanner. Something powered, about 2 kilometers northeast. Powered things meant heat. Heat meant survival options. It was simple enough logic, and Cal had never been the kind of person to sit still when walking was possible. He was 34 years old, average height, with a beard that had grown past the point of looking intentional and into the territory of looking abandoned. His thermal suit was a standard-issue gray and yellow that had been patched twice at the left elbow. His pack held 3 days of rations, a thermal blanket, a multi-tool, a flare gun with 4 shots, a medical kit, and a thermos of something hot that was becoming less hot by the minute. The energy signature was getting stronger. He was close. Then he crested a low rise in the snow and stopped. For a moment he did not process what he was seeing. His brain tried to sort it into categories it already had, and the categories did not fit. There was a crashed ship. That part he understood. He had seen crashed ships before, not often, but enough. This one was enormous, the kind of vessel that transported cargo or prisoners across long distances. It had come down hard. The impact zone stretched out in both directions, and pieces of it were half buried under fresh snow. And then there were the other things. They were chained to the wreckage. 2 of them. Each one was larger than anything Cal had ever seen up close, easily the size of a small building, though they were both lying down. They had scales. They had wings, folded and frost-covered. They had long necks and heads that were built for something much more serious than looking decorative. They looked ancient in the way that mountains look ancient, like they had been here longer than the idea of being afraid of them. One of them was watching him. The eye that was turned toward him was the size of a dinner plate. The color was a pale, washed-out gold. It tracked him with a kind of slow, exhausted attention. Cal stood there for a moment. The wind pushed at his back. His scanner beeped quietly in his hand. He took a breath. Then he walked down the rise toward them. The one that was watching him made a sound as he got closer. It was a deep sound, felt more in the chest than heard through the ears. A warning, maybe. Or an attempt at one. It came out rough and broken, like something that had been trying to work and could not quite manage it. Cal slowed his pace but did not stop. He kept his hands visible. He had learned that much from working around large and nervous animals during his 2 years on the frontier survey teams. Slow movements. No sudden gestures. Let them see your hands. He stopped about 10 feet away. Close enough to see the frost built up around the larger one's nose. Close enough to see that the other one, the black-scaled one, was not opening its eyes and was breathing in a way that did not seem right. Too slow. Too shallow. Cal crouched down in the snow so he was lower than the watching eye. It was not exactly a non-threatening pose, given that he was already approximately the size of the creature's paw, but it felt like the right instinct. He looked at the black-scaled one for a moment. Then he unzipped his pack. The watching one made another sound. Louder this time. Cal did not stop. He pulled out the thermal blanket, thin, silver-coated, designed to reflect body heat back at the person wrapped in it, and walked slowly to the black-scaled one. He found the part of its neck that was most exposed to the wind. He shook the blanket out and draped it there as best he could. It looked very small against the scale of the creature, like putting a bandage on a mountain. But it was something. He stepped back and looked at the one that was watching him. It had not moved. It was staring at him with an expression he could not fully read. But it had not moved. "Hey," Cal said. His voice was swallowed quickly by the wind. He did not know if they understood speech at all, or what kind, or whether it mattered. But silence seemed worse. "I am going to make a fire," he said. "And then figure out those chains." The pale gold eye watched him. Cal put his pack down and started looking through the wreckage for anything that would burn. Cal built the fire in the shelter of the largest piece of wreckage. He used broken panels from the ship's interior wall for the frame. Inside the frame he packed shredded insulation from the hull and a few pieces of what looked like paper-based documentation that had survived the crash in a sealed container. He had found a pressurized fuel cell in one of the outer storage bays, cracked, but still holding enough to give him an ignition source. He was careful with it. A cracked fuel cell treated poorly was just an explosion waiting for a reason. The fire caught on the third try. Small at first, then bigger as the insulation took. It gave off a low orange light and a warmth that Cal could feel on his face from 4 feet away. He stood up and looked at the dragons. The one with the pale gold eyes, the red-brown scaled one, had not looked away from him the entire time he was building the fire. It had watched every movement with a slow, careful attention that Cal might have found unnerving in other circumstances. Right now it mostly just made him feel like he was being graded. The black-scaled one, Selther, though Cal did not know her name yet, had moved slightly. She had turned her head a fraction in the direction of the fire. The thermal blanket had slipped off one edge of her neck, but was still covering most of it. Her breathing was still too slow for Cal's liking, but it had not gotten worse. He pulled the thermos from his pack and sat down on a piece of flat hull plating near the fire. He poured a cup of the hot liquid. It was a grain-based broth, thick and salty, the kind of thing that tasted terrible in normal conditions but remarkable when you were cold, and wrapped his hands around it. Then he looked at the red-brown one and said, "Your translation system working?" A long pause. Then the creature's jaw moved in a slow, deliberate way. The sound that came out was rough and broken, but it had the shape of language underneath it. "Fragments," it said. "Some words." Cal nodded. "Good enough," he said. "My name is Cal. I am from a planet called Earth. I am going to help you if you let me." Another pause. The pale gold eye did not blink. "Vorith," the creature said. And then, with effort, "Why?" Cal thought about that for a second. He wrapped both hands tighter around the thermos cup. The wind pushed a gust of snow sideways past the edge of the wreckage, and the fire bent but did not go out. "Nowhere useful to run," he said. "And you looked like you needed help more than I needed to be scared." Silence. The black-scaled one made a sound then. Low and slow, almost below hearing. Vorith turned his head toward her and they exchanged something. Sounds that were too quiet and too complex for Cal's scanner to catch any of it. After a moment Vorith turned back. "Seltha says," Vorith told him, with the flatness of someone translating very carefully, "that she has lived 4,011 years. She has never heard a more absurd reason for bravery." Cal almost smiled. "Tell her I said thank you," he said. He stood up and pulled the multi-tool from his pack. He walked to the chain that connected Voritha's collar to the anchor ring in the wreckage. He crouched and looked at the lock mechanism closely. It was Drevkith made. He had seen Drevkith engineering once before, on a salvage job near the mid-rim systems. They liked magnetic locks. Layered magnetic locks, which meant the fields had to be deactivated in a specific sequence or the whole thing would seize and refuse to open at all. He needed power to do it. The right kind of power. He stood up and looked back at the ship. There was a storage bay on the port side that he had not fully checked. "Worth a look." He turned to Vorith. "I need to look in more of your wreckage," he said. "I am going to find a way to get these chains off you." Vorith watched him for a long moment. Then he said, slowly, "My crew." There were Drevkith guards. 7. Cal met the pale gold eye. "I counted the same number," he said. "I am sorry." Vorith said nothing to that. He just watched. Cal pulled out his rations and set 2 packets near Selther's head, close enough that she could reach them without effort. They were human-portioned, which meant they were probably laughably small. But it was what he had. Selther opened one eye and looked at the packets. Then she looked at Cal. Something in her expression shifted in a way he could not entirely read, but it felt like something had been noted and recorded somewhere very deep. I will be right back, Cal told them both. He picked up his multi-tool and his scanner and headed toward the portside storage bay, stepping over broken pieces of the ship as the fire crackled behind him and the wind screamed above everything. He was talking to himself as he walked, working through the problem out loud the way he always did. Magnetic sequence lock. Needs external power input. Probably a Drevkith standard charge. Something in that bay. Has to be. Behind him, Vorath watched the small figure disappear into the wreckage. After a long silence, Selther spoke. Her voice was barely a sound. But Vorath heard it. He is going to try, she said. Yes, Vorath said. She was quiet again. Then, he is going to get hurt doing it. Vorath did not answer that. Because he thought she was probably right. Cal found what he needed in the third container he opened. It was a Drevkith emergency power cell, the kind that maintenance workers carried in case of system failures aboard long-haul vessels. It was bruised from the crash and one corner had a small fracture in the casing, but the charge indicator still showed 63%. That was more than enough if he was careful. He brought it back to the chains and crouched in front of Vorath's lock mechanism. Selther had raised her head slightly while he was gone. Her eyes were more open now, and she watched him work with the same slow, careful attention that Vorath had been giving him since the beginning. Cal plugged the power cell leads into the lock's input port, crossed his fingers in a way that was entirely personal and meant nothing to anyone else, and ran the charge. The lock made a sound like a large bell being hit with a hammer and then went completely still. He tried the sequence again. Same result. He pulled the leads out and looked at the port more carefully. Something was blocking the second contact point. A piece of shrapnel, bent inward from the crash. He worked at it with the thin edge of his multi-tool for several minutes, his fingers going numb in the cold. The piece shifted. Then came loose. He ran the charge a third time. The power cell sparked hard enough that he felt it in his elbow and dropped the leads in the snow. He sat back and breathed for a second, shaking his hand out. His sleeve was torn at the forearm. The skin underneath was red but not broken. Vorath made a sound above him. Cal looked up. "You told me to stop," he said. "I heard you. I am finishing this." Vorath said nothing. But his jaw was tight in a way that Cal was beginning to learn meant he was feeling something he did not have a simple word for. Cal picked up the leads again. He checked the contact points one more time. He looked at the sequence code on the lock face, which he had memorized from the Drevkith engineering specs he had once read on a slow week between survey jobs. He had not expected that reading to ever be useful. He was glad now that boredom had made him thorough. He ran the charge a fourth time, this time with the sequence held in the right order. The lock opened. A clean, decisive sound. The chain went slack. Cal sat back on his heels. "Selther's chain," he said. "Let me look at hers next." Selther's lock was a different type. Older. When Cal got close to it, Vorath said quietly, "Her chain is biometric. It needs the guard captain's key module." The captain was Drevkith. "He is inside the ship." Cal looked at the wreckage. The interior of the main cabin was partially collapsed. Some of the entry points he had already passed through were tight, and one had a support beam hanging at an angle he did not love. He put his pack down. He kept the multi-tool. He looked at both dragons for a moment, then turned and went into the wreck. It was dim inside. The emergency lighting had failed, and the only light came from the gaps in the hull where the panels had torn away. Cal moved slowly, testing the floor with each step before putting his weight on it. The ship groaned somewhere above him. He did not hurry, but he did not stop. It took 11 minutes. He found the guard captain in the second compartment, pinned under a collapsed section of the ceiling. The key module was on a belt clip at the captain's side. Cal worked it free carefully. The module was scratched but intact. He came back out through the same gap he had entered from, ducking under the hanging beam. His sleeve was torn on the other arm now, catching on a jagged edge he had not seen. The cold hit him again immediately. Vorath had not moved, but he was watching the entrance with an intensity that surprised Cal when he noticed it. Selther spoke then, before Vorath did. Her voice was slow and low and clear. "We were imprisoned," she said, "because we refused to let the Drevkith mine a world. A small world. The people there had not yet reached the stars. The Drevkoth wanted the minerals under their cities. Cal walked to her chain and matched the key module to the biometric port. He pressed it in and waited. "We knew what would happen to us if we stood in their way," Selther said. "We stood there anyway." The lock opened. Selther's chain hit the snow. She did not stand. She did not have the strength for it yet. But she lifted her head fully for the first time in days, and the line of her neck was straight and proud in a way that had nothing to do with how much energy she had left. Cal stepped back and looked at both of them. Vorith, unchained, was still lying in the snow. Selther was still too weak to rise. But something had changed in the air between the three of them. Two of the most ancient and powerful creatures in any recorded part of the galaxy. And one human in a torn thermal suit, standing in the snow of a place that had no name on any map he had ever seen. None of them said anything for a moment. Then Cal picked up his pack. "My crew is about 2 kilometers that way," he said, pointing southwest. "We need to get back to them before the next blizzard." Selther could not walk. Not yet. Vorith could. Barely. His legs were stiff and slow, and he moved with the careful, deliberate effort of something that had spent too long lying still in the cold. But he moved. He stood, all 40 feet of him rising out of the snow like a piece of the mountain deciding it had somewhere to be, and he stood. Cal watched him stand and said nothing. Some things do not need words. Selther could not stand, but she could move on her belly, pulling herself forward with her front legs, her wings folded tight against her sides. It was slow and it looked like it cost her, but she did not stop and she did not ask for help. Cal walked beside her, matching her pace, watching the direction they were heading. Vorith walked on Cal's other side, which put Cal between two creatures that together weighed more than most buildings. Vorith breathed out once in a long, controlled stream. The fire that came from a Vrethkai dragon at full strength could melt steel. At a fraction of his strength, with his fire still partly suppressed by the collar's fading residue, what Vorith produced was less dramatic. But it was enough to melt a path through the deep snow ahead of them, turning it to flat water that froze again within minutes but gave them a brief, easier surface to cross. He did this in sections, walking ahead a little, breathing, letting Cal and Selther catch up, then moving ahead again. It took them just over an hour to cover the 2 kilometers. The survey vessel Dawnchaser was a long, low ship built for function rather than appearance. It sat at an angle where the buckled landing strut had given way. Warm light came from the main cabin windows. A makeshift shelter had been rigged from cargo tarps near the hatch, and under that shelter sat Diane Cole, the ship's engineer, and 2 other crew members, Pete Larson and Lou Grant, who were playing cards in the way that people play cards when they are trying very hard not to think about something. Diane saw them first. She stood up so fast she knocked the cards off the crate they were using as a table. She looked at Cal, she looked at the 2 dragons standing behind him. She looked back at Cal. "Hey," Cal said. Diane had 17 years of experience in deep-range survey work. She had seen a lot of things. She stood there in the cold light from the shelter and processed what she was seeing with the particular silence of someone who understands that screaming would not be useful and asking questions can wait. "We have a hull breach," she said finally. "Port side. Been trying to patch it, but the material is not holding in this cold." Cal turned to Vorith. "The hull of our ship has a crack in it," he said. "The metal needs heat to seal." Vorith looked at the ship. Then he looked at Cal then, with very great care, he lowered his head to the port side of the Dawnchaser and breathed along the crack in the hull. Slow and even and precise. The metal glowed. Then it softened. Then it sealed, the edges pressing together under their own weight and the heat holding them. It was not a permanent fix. It was not even a good fix. But it was enough. Pete said something very quietly under his breath. Lou did not say anything at all. They worked together through what was left of the afternoon. The dragons rested near the ship, their shared warmth doing more for the temperature inside the Dawnchaser than the heating unit had managed all day. Cal and Diane got the distress beacon running at full strength. Pete found what was wrong with the fuel coupling and started the repair. Lou made hot food for everyone, which included attempting to calculate how much a dragon might want to eat and then multiplying it by a number he admitted was probably still too small. Selther ate what was offered. She did not comment on the quantity. The gesture was what mattered, and she understood that. Late in the day, When the sky was going dark and the wind had dropped to something almost bearable, Vorith came and lowered his head near where Cal was sitting. "We have crossed star systems," Vorith said. "We have ended wars. We have been given tribute by kings and feared by emperors." Cal looked at him. "But," he said. Vorith was quiet for a moment. "We have never been helped," he said. Cal turned his thermos cup in his hands. "Considered that." Seltha came close on the other side, her great black head settling near the ground. "We did not know what to think of humans," she said. "Your kind is young. Small. The galaxy did not take you seriously." Cal shrugged. "That has always worked out fine for us," he said. Selther made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh that Cal had heard from her. It was warm. The rescue ship came the next morning. It was a neutral zone vessel, gray and large, with a crew of 6 species that had seen a great many things in their combined years of service. When they dropped into visual range of the Dawn Chaser, they saw 2 Vrethkai dragons standing outside a tiny human survey vessel in the snow, positioned facing outward, wings slightly spread. Standing guard. The rescue crew took a moment before they opened a channel. Before Cal boarded the rescue ship, Vorith pressed something into his palm with the very tip of one claw. It was a scale. Black at the base, edged in deep, dark blue along the outer curve. It was about the length of Cal's forearm and surprisingly light. "Among the Vrethkai," Selther said, "that means the debt cannot be repaid. It means if you call, we will come." Cal looked at the scale for a long time. Then he looked up at both of them. "Take care of yourselves," he said. The rescue ship lifted off. Cal stood at the small porthole and watched Keth grow smaller below them. He could still see the 2 shapes in the snow until the cloud cover took them. In the snow far below, Vorith watched the ship disappear into the pale sky. Selther came and stood beside him. "Perhaps the young ones are not what we assumed," Vorith said. Selther looked up at the empty sky where the ship had been. "No," she said quietly. "They are something else entirely." The wind moved across the snow. The sky was pale and wide and cold. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them had anything more to say, not because there was nothing to say, but because some things settle into you in silence, and this was one of them.